Good afternoon, good morning, or even good evening. Welcome and thank you for joining already the fourth session of the NNIP Responsible Investing Summer Course, an initiative held in collaboration with leading academics from universities around the globe. My name is Adrie Heinsbroek and I'm a member of the Responsible Investment team at NN Investment Partners, and for today, your moderator. For those of you joining us for the first time, the summer course is a series of virtual, interactive lectures on topics related to responsible investing, consumer behavior, and sustainable finance, and it runs until the end of September. You can join us either live or review a recording at your own convenience in your own time. The aim of this course is to educate investors on the impact COVID-19 is having on governments, corporates, and individual behavior, and to what extent these changes we have witnessed are here to stay. Additionally, it also explores the impact on responsible investing and sustainable finance and how these fields will likely to evolve and interact. The CFA Institute, not very unimportantly, the Global Association for Investment Management Professionals, appointed one continuing education credit per lecture. Allow me first on some housekeeping items. The floor is open for all of your questions. Please use for questions the chat function. Feel free to send in your questions at any time and we will get them up as we go along. Also, allow me to explain to you how this platform works. On the slide, you see some areas. The stage where we are now is the main stage, where the speakers will be hosting their keynotes and where we will have the Q&A. Look out for pinned messages at the top of the chat for any announcements from our crew. If you experience any technical issues, please do send us a message in the chat by using @NNIP. The team here will try to respond as quickly as possible. Well, we sorted out the logistics. Let's dig into today's session. We have the pleasure and honor of having Jan Jonker with us. Jan is Professor of Sustainable Entrepreneurship at Radboud University in Nijmegen, here in the Netherlands. His work focuses on the transition to new economic models based on sustainability, social inclusion, and circularity. He has written over 34 books and hundreds of other publications, and he's well known as an activist researcher with a very pragmatic approach to stimulating societal change. He is also one of the organizers of the international conferences on new business models. And these events have been held annually since 2016 and provide a forum for young scientists, beginning entrepreneurs, and other practitioners such as investors as well as academics. And to remind you, in the first three summer courses, we discussed the role that governments, corporates, and individuals played towards the transition to a more sustainable economy. Today's session is more on designing new business models with impact. As we are in the middle of a transition to a different, even more sustainable society. And for companies and organizations actively contributing to this transition, it is no longer an option. This is what the next steps need to be. Organizations must structure themselves sustainably and contribute to resolving their customer sustainability challenges in both a measurable as well as impactful way. This implies changes in thinking, in strategy, and also in business and revenue models. And that's what we will discuss today. Business models should have a positive impact on people, society, and the environment. So please join me in welcoming Jan. He's joining us today from his home in the middle of the Netherlands. Jan, I think the sun is shining at your place as well as it is here in The Hague.
Adrie, first of all, thank you very much for this warm welcome. The sun is shining, so the word summer course couldn't fit better what you are doing. And it's an honor and a pleasure to be with you today.
Thank you, Jan. And indeed, it is a summer course, so it's great to have so many people joining us today. So without further ado, it's my pleasure now to hand over to you, Jan. Jan, please start your lecture on designing these new business models. And remember, I will join you again after the keynote for the Q&A. Jan, the floor is yours.
Ladies and gentlemen, from around the world, welcome to this summer course. Welcome to this specific topic about sustainable business modeling. And thank you for taking the time to listen to me. What I will try to do today is to link two subjects. On the one hand, I will discuss the notion of transition, of fundamental societal change, and what I will do is to link this notion of transition with business modeling, and I've called that the new generation of business models, because in this talk I like to show you that we are seeing three archetypes of new business models emerging that enable us to work in a more sustainable, more socially inclusive way. Before we introduce this subject of transition and business modeling, I like to do a first introduction to why it is relevant to discuss a new generation of business models. Well, you must have been living under a stone somewhere in order not to understand that the world around us is changing. And it is changing from a rather specific point in time. And for me, the point in time, the moment in time that opened up my eyes, I wasn't even born, is this cover of Life you are seeing, and it states, "Throw away living." For those that do not know where this cover is coming from, this was published in 1954, and it was a deliberate act from the American government to introduce a new policy. And the essence of that policy was that people would become happy if they started throwing things away. And I'm not joking in saying so. No, thou shalt become happy because now everything you have can be thrown away. Well, this axioma, this principle, we have embraced in the last 70 years in such a way that we now live in a society where literally everything from cars to computers, from food to packaging, from almost anything we use can be thrown away. We call this the policy of obsolescence. And obsolescence can be found in different levels and different approaches, but the essence is and remains that we throw things away. In developing this policy, we've gone so far that we even think that we live in a natural environment or even a material, a commodities environment where everything is available in an abundant way, so it doesn't matter that a couple of million bees are being killed due to some pesticide, or that we are approaching the limits of digging up, of pumping up oil. So it has led in hardly 70 years' time to a great number of negative effects. Maybe you know this series of pictures done by an Australian photographer who started to picturize, to make photos of animals died due to the effect of eating plastics. Isn't it very curious that we allow that animals can eat so much waste that when we open them up, as you can see in this picture, that they simply die. And it tells us that on the one hand we have invented plastics or artificial materials, but on the other hand this is what we should get rid of. And at the same time we see other curious phenomenon of this policy of obsolescence. We throw away excellent functioning equipment such as phones, and it's not because the phone isn't working anymore, but simply because there's a new model, a new type, a new gadget, and out of the window it goes. So maybe it's time we should think a little bit more about the way we use things and stop wasting precious materials and equipment. Or how about, as a third example, the fact that roughly, depending on how you measure, 64, 65, 63% of the food produced is thrown away in the value chain. So the fact that there are people hungry, which is terrible, is not because there's not enough food, but simply because we have developed a concept of food and we have developed logistics change in such a way that 64% in the total value chain gets lost. All these elements together create stronger and stronger voices for transition. And I call it time for transitions. And of course, we all know that there was a famous singer who sung the song about times they are a-changing. Well, certainly we are now living in times of transition. We have debates about energy transition, making energy sustainable, not only what we are doing at present, but also creating enough energy to change, for example, the increasing consumption of our energy. We have a ferocious and very problematic and not always concordant debate about climate change. Is climate change about CO2 reduction? If it's about CO2 reduction, it is about, let me use the word once, radical CO2 reduction. Well, if that is the case, climate change and the economy are linked one-to-one together. And we have a third debate, the resources debate. Like I stipulated before, it is important to understand that the way we use resources, commodities, materials, is taking such a pace, is so grown over the top, that we not only have a discussion about lack of oil, we can always debate, but at least lack of cheap oil, but we have now also entered a debate on the scarce resources of water approaching fast. And yes, one of the upcoming debates is, for example, the lack of sand. Now, the essence here is not that we have a number of separate debates in different boxes, but more and more we start to understand that all these different transitions, all these fundamental changes need to be addressed at the same time. And the complexity of the word transition is that there is no roadmap, there is no guided profile to address how transitions should work. What, in essence, is a transition? I think it is a radical change in a societal system, a system we have around us, so a system such as our food provision, mobility, healthcare, energy, etc., that assures societal and human, I call it functionalities, but these are not the functionalities of a home, but there are common functionalities. So it is the energy system, the food system, etc., etc. Now the essence here is that basically we are approaching the edge of the functionality of those systems, most of them being set up in the 60s, 70s, and others will even say set up after the Second World War. So basically, when we use the word transition, we also say implicitly we like to create an economic system change. And the essence of that system change is that we move from a consumptive obsolescence system to a system where a more collaborative economic system is replacing it. So we are trying to find out, because transitions do not have a concrete shape and size, we are trying to find out how we can develop a collaborative economic system, not a system in which companies stand central, but in which value creation, and more in particular, collaborative value creation stands central. One of the promising developments, one of the emerging developments in this field is that we are getting more and more used to servitization of the things we need. And we call that the tendency of product as a service, but I will talk about a little bit more in a moment. It means that, in my opinion, if we want to create a new economy, we move away from an economy based on a perspective of individuals and we move towards something which we could call the commons economy. Now, the intriguing thing is that one of the presidents before the present person that calls himself president, one of the presidents from the past, Abraham Lincoln, a great statesman, did a talk in Gettysburg in the US in 1863, that's quite some time ago, and he said we need to create an economy of the people, for the people, and by the people. And later on we've developed this into what is known as the commons, or the elements we have together. But we seem to have forgotten this principle altogether, and what I'm basically saying is we need to rediscover, reshape the commons economy based on principles we already have. Now, this in itself leads to a question on how transitions emerge. And there are all kinds of theories on how to shape these transitions, but here I give a little simplified number of pictures to show you how you can think about transitions. First of all, there is transition on different layers, and it starts in niches, or some would say networks or companies. In other words, transition starts at the bottom, where people start experimenting and developing living labs and communities of practice. It starts small and it grows and it grows. Then at the level of regimes, and a regime is what the food sector or the mobility sector or the healthcare sector is doing, at the regime we start to question how the regime has been built over time and what needs to be changed in an initially stable regime. In other words, we start adjusting things in the regime, and over time the essence is that this leads to a breakthrough of rules and regulations, of agreements, leading to a new configuration. And thirdly, there is the landscape level of transition, and it means that what we do, either companies in the niche or the regime of different actors, is always embedded in a landscape of rules and regulations of what I would call institutions. Now, the core of the whole talk on transition is that we need changes on three levels: in companies, in regimes, and in the landscape, to make fundamental changes. That all sounds pretty maybe evident, maybe not, but the question then, of course, is how do we create those transitions? How do they come about? Because for many people, transitions appear as the famous elephant in the room, the elephant in a dark room where people blindfolded touch the elephant and they all see different elements, different aspects of the transition at hand. My approach in addressing transitions is that we need to economize transition. So far, for many people, transition is rather spooky. It is emerging. You can't touch it. You can't grab it. And I think that the only way, because we live in an economized society, to make transitions come about is to economize transition, and we should do so value-based. In other words, people only get engaged if we share values in what we would like to achieve. Now, economizing transition value-based leads to a different way of thinking about business modeling. And the key word I like to use here is that we have to rethink business modeling from a organization-centric perspective to a collaborative perspective. Because only then we can get the values for collective value creation. And yes, this kind of thinking is quite a transition, not only in business practice, but also in our minds. It helps a little bit to explain what business models are. Well, to me, business models, it's relatively thinking as simple, but you can always say, and why did you then wrote 6 or 7 books about it? Sorry, they are actionable patterns based on a logic with the aim to create value. In other words, business models are not revenue models, but a business model creates a logic for value creation. And the great underlying transition in our business model thinking is that we move away from single value creation, most of the time monetized, to multiple value creation, meaning that we start to see more and more that we want companies not only to create financial value, but also all kinds of other values, such as ecological value. We call that sometimes regenerative value or restorative values. In other words, the change is also in the nature of value creation. For most people, this either implicitly or explicitly is the model they have in the back of their heads when it comes to value creation. It was created by a colleague called Osterwalder in 2004, that is 16 years ago, and simply he said, well, value creation is driven by organizations. They structure, they organize in a network of partners based on core capacities how value is created, and yes, they spend money on creating that value. Then they make a value proposition to a customer or customers, and the customers are a target customer group that can be reached through a distribution channel, and no, not one company can serve all customers, so we have a customer segment. The essence is that customers pay for a value proposition, and it leads to a revenue stream. Now the essence here is that the costs and the revenues either determine failure or success. And in this model, implicitly, everything is drilled down to a monetized comparison. This is what people think is a business model. And the funny thing here is that the business model, the logic for value creation, is one-to-one the same as a revenue model. Now, if we have a transition in our thinking about value creation, and if we move away from a pure financial focus towards valuing sets of value, ecological, social, environmental, what have you, then this implies that we have to think about the logic we need to create this kind of values. Now, value creation itself is in transition, I already said before, and if we take a quick look at what this means, we see that we have 5 positions for value creation. We come from an economy, we still live in an economy where transformation, where making things is dominant. Selling stuff is the key of obsolescence, as I've said before. More and more, since the 70s in the US and more in Europe, we've started saying that we need to emphasize recycling. That is an old song, if I can say so, because recycling isn't new at all, and it simply says, and I don't want to be impolite to anybody, but recycling is look in the bin and look if there's still something that's valuable. And yes, I know it can be said much politer, but that is the essence. In recent years, we started to discuss circularizing material. Circularity, or the circular economy, or it's also named the performance economy. The concept was invented, was launched somewhere in the 70s of the last century. It was then forgotten for almost 40 years, except for a happy few. But in very recent years, last 10 years, we have rediscovered the circular economy, and the essence of the circular economy is value preservation. Now, value preservation means we do not want to make as many products as we can and sell them as quickly as we can in the highest possible volume. On the contrary, circularization means that we preserve the value that we have to the longest possible extent. So longevity or lifetime extension becomes a crucial strategy. In recent years, people started saying circularizing, or the circular economy, is not enough because all kinds of social and other elements are missing. We need to develop an economy that is regenerative in nature, meaning that a company should improve the social and ecological situation when she is working in a specific situation. And there are even voices that say we need to have companies that in their operation, they restore the social and ecological environment. And it simply means that if you start building washing machines or houses or cars, the way you operate leads to a better social and ecological situation. Now, that for many people might be a little bit the music of the future, but please do understand the notion of value creation itself is in transition. And in that transition, we see three concepts emerging, three ideas emerging, which I have called earlier on archetypes of business models. And they are about collaborative business modeling, they are about collective business modeling, and they are about shared business modeling. Now, the essence of this second part implies that the Osterwalder business model canvas, because that's the full acronym of this picture, is no longer valid, and I would even say has become dangerously obsolete. Maybe that's a little bit too strong, but it means that a conventional approach to a logic of business modeling and thus value creation does not fit to the requirements when it comes to the change in value creation. Now, if we start doing research, and as a full professor, this is of course great fun to do research around the world, see what is happening in the field, we see three major developments. We see three major developments leading to the question, how are today's business models contributing to a transition in valuing different values? That's an interesting question because there's not a list somewhere where you can dig up a new generation of business models, and if you do so, you will see most of the time It's all about revenue models. Now, please remember, business models were about and are addressing actionable patterns for creating multiple values. And the key then is, how do these business models create a logic for a different kind of value creation? And yes, this is the essence of the entire talk so far. Now, the logic of value creation in business models is a way of thinking. In other words, it doesn't grow on a tree. You can find it in libraries. No, you decide strategically what kind of logic as a company you adopt. It's a choice. It is even better, not it is a intentional choice. Second, value creation, this logic you have decided, always comes about with a configuration of parties. And there we see also changes. Our conventional wisdom tells us we have to work in value change, the famous 1970 concepts, but nowadays we see that a configuration of parties, and yes, it doesn't state stakeholders or just business, no, parties, a configuration of new and old parties is needed to create this logic. And yes, finally, there are revenue models. And some of you might say, I'm very happy to hear revenue models. It means where's the till, where's the money coming in? But now the funny thing is that if we see a transition in our thinking about value creation, also the revenue models will change. These three elements together create a business model. You can't take one away, because then your construct of a business model is going broke. Now, if that is the logic of a business model, you can raise the question, so what? What does it mean? What do I see? Where does it lead to? What we have done over the last 5 or 6 years is developed something that is a little classy, academic, called a meta typology of business models. So I will not go into all kinds of details of different business models. We don't have the time for that, but I will describe 3 what I call archetypes of business models. And please be aware that we do so taking the present, what is called make, take, waste economy, the linear economy, as a starting point. We are not living in a desert. Society is not starting at scratch. No, we have to live with the given that we live in this society, and we need to make changes in that society. For me, the leading argument is that we move from this linear or take, make, waste economy to at least a circular economy. So I go well beyond recycling, and I try to advocate circularity, or, like I've said before, value preservation. And I know I have to discuss the regenerative and restorative economy, certainly because we have all kinds of issues around biodiversity, but I do tend to focus a little bit on this element. Now, the first thing we see in this linear economy is that we have a compilation of things. We are surrounded by stuff, be it clothes, be it cars, be it equipment, be it technology, be it what have you, that we hardly use. That is a very strange observation, and we know this. And the first thing we can discuss then, of course, is, can't we use what we have better? This is also the essence of what in the 70s was called the performance economy. Can't we use better? But now, given all kinds of digital technology, we all of a sudden start to understand that what we have can be used much better. This leads to the first archetype of a business models. And yes, these are platform business models. And platform business models is not about, dear neighbor, can I share your lawnmower, but platform model, business models can be used in a variety of settings and are leading to what is now called product as a service or servitized models. But the essence is we have stuff, and based on digital technology, we can make known and unknown combinations. The funny thing is that all is basically in place, but we are hardly really using this kind of concept. Yes, in Holland, where we live, where I live, we have platforms for bicycles, but we could use platforms for all kinds of things in all kinds of different respects. And do not forget, using platforms for a better use of your materials does not, by definition, lead to more sustainability. I'll give you one example, because we don't have the time to share too many examples, but we have here the Access Material Exchange app, and I should say platform, and this means that in building situation, construction sites, the observation is that a lot of material gets wasted, new, unused material, and that this app helps to find parts of these wasted, new, unused materials and link it to new customers. It is a very simple example, but I think we have found 100 or 150 of examples, either from customers to customers or consumers to consumers, from business to consumers, but also from consumers to business, and of course, business to business. Here is a simple business to business example, the shared asset website of Flow2, who is connecting competencies of people and technology, be it tractors, be it trucks, be it people, be it capacities in hospital. They call it asset sharing, but that is also a way to frame it. Let's move to the next model. The second, maybe even more interesting model, because platform business models have been around for quite a while, but are becoming more and more mature, are what I call community-based business models. We see more and more groups in the world, groups of people, of citizens, combined with business, raising the idea that they can, for example, create their own energy or organize their own food provision in a way. So they cut away the conventional value chain and they buy directly a farm, or they buy a number of commodities in which, for example, food or energy is created, or they start an energy cooperative with 100, 500 or what have you people. These people basically can be normal conventional citizens, but they in essence start a business model. They develop a logic for value creation either on a single issue, but what we see now more and more is that they develop a business model on multiple issues. So in the neighborhood, we create energy that is used in the houses, but also we create a network of electric cars, and we can pay each other through blockchain, for example, with energy as a currency. We have, of course, developed a sub-model for community-based business models. Yeah, it sounds a little bit complicated, but it's the elaboration of how this could come about. So you have a community that develops a value proposition for themselves based on principles such as sharing and investing and participating. You need a design of that business model, and yes, it works because people get output, and they get output through the way value is being created. A simple French example, which hopefully many of you know, is one of the very successful car sharing concepts, a French concept. It's called a blah blah car, and blah blah means, in decent popular French, chatting away. Well, the value proposition is not car sharing here, but is company. And the company goes as far, so it is, let me repeat, it is company, is being together, it's being part of a community. And the company goes as far that when you say, I have a car, I have to travel from Paris to Lyon or what have you, I like to have people on board to share my car. You can indicate if you like to have a lot of chat or moderate chat or very little chat. And yes, as a decent little detail, you can also add, for example, I will bring my own cookie. Is this logic for value creation working? Yes, it works. It is one of the leading, and yes, there are others, one of the leading car sharing companies, where people create value for each other, earn money, share assets, so different values come together. Finally, of course, it's evident, because I already talked about it, we see emerging the notion of circular business models. Very often, circular business models started basically as a way of preserving a little bit more commodities, an extension of recycling, but the essence, like I said, of circular business models is value preservation. And if we start to design and to use from the perspective of value preservation, we set the entire economy upside down. Because organizing value preservation happens in loops. Well, then this is the core of the circular economy, a loop where different parties across the life cycle of a product or parts or even the commodity, the basics of that product, engage over time to preserve value. Well, this is not the economy of take, make, waste. This is a totally different economy, because it means we are engaged with each other for, say, this bridge or this part of the road for the next 30 years, or we make a dress and then the dress is being reused after 5 years. In other words, the moment we start saying the core of the circularity is engagement over time in loops, we need to specify those loops a little better. We have 3 major sectors of loops, and each of those loops creates its own problems. First of all, we have fast consumer goods and the packaging that goes with it, from food we are using but we are wasting, but also the cellophanes we use to wrap up the meat and what have you. And these are all products that have a very short life cycle. Think of the bottles we throw away when it comes to drinking sodas. A major fundamental problem, and this leads to an incredible waste of plastics and what have you. We have, as a second major group, mid-range groups, and mid-range groups are the things we use for over a longer time, and it all depends what your time frame is. But clothes are a typical example, shoes are a typical example, cars are a typical example, and what have you. These products last for a longer period of time, but in using a life cycle extension strategy or a lifetime extension strategy, a lot of things can be done here. And finally, we have slow goods, and the most interesting thing is that slow goods are bridges, buildings, flats, what have you. And the interesting thing here is that without any difficulty, slow goods are being used for 50 years or 75 years, and that it means that we have to design with a future in mind that we don't know. So we need to register what is being put as materials in those bridges, roads and buildings, so that we can check the quality and the usability of those materials. So saying very quickly that loops are the essence of the circular economy is of course fun, but once you start elaborating, you create a lot of new problems, because you have to think about material value preservation. How is concrete doing over time? You have functional value preservation. In other words, I have this fridge, I've adopted a strategy of longevity of the fridge. What does it mean? And finally, and let's be very realistic, we have economic value preservation, because at present our revenue models are based on value depreciation, and now we like to preserve the value of the stuff around us. So what does it mean for the till? Let me give two examples of young companies that try to put the circular economy into practice. One of them is a company called Peel Pioneers here in the Netherlands, but I suppose that in many places in the world it's exactly the same. We have become addicted to a glass of fresh apple juice in the morning, at the station, at the restaurant, what have you. It leads to an incredible amount of orange peels every day, tons and tons and tons. And what do we do with those peels? We burn them. We use them in what is called thermal upcycling. Now, this small company said, well, if I look at orange peels, there's a lot of things you can do with it. You can extract all kinds of fragrances. You can use it to make food for animals. And yes, the leftovers you can still burn. So what is happening is a whole industry is emerging when it comes to reusing these clean mono streams of, yes, waste. A second example is the phenomenon elephant grass, which grows on all kinds of places where nothing else likes to grow. It is about roughly 2.30 meters to 2.50 meters high. And if you treat elephant grass, you can break it down to all kinds of usable chemical, bio-based elements, leading to, for example, macadam for highways, which is then linked which is then made not on the basis of oil, but it's based on material, on lignine, it's called. It's based on linking material from bio-based materials. There are, one more time, hundreds of examples in which we can see how this circular economy can come about. I'd like to wrap up because there's a lot more to say about business modeling, but the essence here is and remain, we are moving and we're in or are already witnessing a period of transition, and business has to move along, has to adopt to the business models that lead to value creation in that transition. So the essence of my talk of today is we need to fundamentally change our perspective, our idea on business models in order to stimulate transition, because we need to develop a new economic commons. So don't wait either for the government to tell you that now you need to fundamentally work on CO2 reduction, or that you still have a year to move towards a more green energy provision. Start working on it today. And yes, the message is and remains, transition is difficult. I'll show you finally 3 pictures. And you simply ask the question, am I looking here to a linear hamburger, a conventional take, make, waste hamburger? Am I looking at a circular hamburger? And if so, where do I see circularity? What does it mean to talk about a circular hamburger? How do you translate this into a business proposition? Or some people would say, just give me a sustainable hamburger, and then the essence, of course, is tell me what sustainability means in this case. This is the challenge lying ahead for at least the coming decade. Thank you very much for listening to me, and I'll give the word to you, Adrie.
Yeah, thank you, Jan, for your thought-provoking lecture. I really liked how you tried to make theory tangible. So let's dive immediately into the Q&A session. Please remember, audience, submit your questions, use the chat, and allow me already to start with the first question. Jan, you spoke about substantial change that you need, so a fundamental change. We have a question from Harpreet Bhatia. So how is a product as a service business model different from circular model? As an example, a tire company starts offering tires as a service. They are incentivized for longevity of the tire, but isn't that already a circular business model? Could you quickly answer that one?
Quickly is, I'm making a little joke here, Adrie. These questions are so difficult that a quick answer is maybe not entirely sufficient, but I will try to do so. First of all, a service model, a service business model simply means bottom line. I try to give the answer bottom line. It simply means is the company is no longer selling a product, so there's not a change of ownership, but you use the service of a product. Yeah. It means that you do not buy a chair, but you buy the capacity that you can sit. And we can find so also for example, in electricity, where you do not buy electricity in itself and everything that you need to make light. No, you buy the light. That's part one. Now, the second part, when it comes to circularity, is that you can make a service model based on linear products produced in the make, take, waste thing, or you can also say, gee, I now develop a product that is designed from a longevity strategy and which is not simply usable for the next, say, 3 months, but for the next 3 to 5 years. If you combine both perspectives, longevity and product as a service, you are laying the foundation for a new business model, but you should be smart and do the two things at the same time.
Okay, so two things at the same time, and it is rather complex. Thank you. You just said also in the end of your speech a bit, don't wait for governments. But what should or could governments and policymakers do to support this transition, Jan?
Well, basically, of course, these governments 90% of the time act in conventional rules, regulations, call it institutional wisdom. In other words, when we made laws about, for example, what waste is, those laws were made in the 60s or 70s or what have you. When we made laws about recyclability or even the use of recycled plastics, these were made in the 70s and the 80s. And the question is, are these laws, rules and regulations still appropriate to stimulate transition? In many cases, we need to draw the inevitable conclusion that that is not the case. So governments need to shape conditions, legal, regulative, I call them institutional conditions, to help companies make the transition. Very often, I'm sorry to say, that is not the case, or governments are very slow. But here in Europe, at least, we have the European Union, and the European Union is trying, with all comments, with all criticism you can have, is trying to shape this institutional environment to the best of their ability. But it is something that will take quite some time.
Ah, okay. So again, it's time and complex. It's interesting to see that. We have a very compelling question from Holger Gruppe, who's a bit in the same line. So if about embracing, so if you need governments to help you, if you need this transition, it is not embraced. How much time do we have? Do we need, is it like Greenpeace, no time to waste? How much time do we have, Jan?
I'm very pleased, Adrie, that you have an audience who's raising all these very complex questions. I would say in a number of cases, we are dangerously too late. For example, if it comes to biodiversity, we really have to set up strategies also from the perspective of companies to stimulate biodiversity, because if all bees are dead, conventional agriculture will stop. So in a number of cases, it is 5 minutes past 12. If we look at the pollution due to artificial materials, we call them plastics, we are 10 minutes past 12, because if we wait another 5 to 10 years, there will be more plastic in the international oceans than fish. And on it goes. So yes, there is a high urgency, but at the same time, I try to be a realistic optimist. I try not to say it's too late, it's over, it's done, etc., etc. No, we need to go to work, companies together with citizens, together with governments, but we have to kick ass. Sorry to say it very bluntly. We really need to change strategies before, and then comes this horrible sentence, before it is too late.
Okay, so time to act. And talking about time.
Time to act.
With this, sorry, Jan?
Yeah, time to act, yes.
Yeah, it's time to act. Okay. So with that positive note, I'm also afraid that our time is up. And I really enjoyed today's session, especially because all the tangibility you tried to bring in it and the passionate way you bring your message across. I also think that I'm very confident that the audience also enjoyed it. So Jan, thanks so much. And from my side, I would like to thank the audience and the people who joined us all for joining us. We hope to see you also again for the next lecture that is scheduled for the 26th of August. Gary Krasinski, professor of Yale University, will then speak about how China is stimulating the transition to a more sustainable society post-COVID-19. For now, wishing you, depending on where you are in the world, a very good afternoon or a very good evening. Thank you so much.